over $700 billion of data centers being built this year, and it's going to be over $1 trillion next year. It's just unbelievable. But when you look at the labor pool, there's a kind of this generational transition where people have not been going into construction, and so the retirement rate is accelerating. There was already a 500,000 worker shortage just as a baseline. That's being exacerbated with the demand. And some of our partners are telling us they're expecting 50% retirement in the next 7 years. And so what we're doing is we're enabling fully autonomous heavy machines, starting with construction, to enable effectively turning these machines into operatorless machines where Bedrock becomes the digital operator and the software services around it, and enables the general contractors in construction or the miners and quarries and mines and farmers in agriculture to be able to operate these machines.
Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. Construction is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. Demand is at an all-time high, and the industry is facing a shortage of almost 500,000 workers with no end in sight. Boris Sofman has spent his entire career building robots that work in the real world. He co-founded Enki, which shipped almost 4 million consumer robots globally. He then went on to lead autonomous trucking at Waymo, where he was part of the team that pioneered what is now the world's most advanced driverless vehicle program. And now he's taken everything he's learned across both of those chapters and applied it into machines that literally build our world. Boris is the co-founder and the CEO of Bedrock Robotics, a company that is almost valued at $2 billion that retrofits existing construction equipment into fully autonomous machines. In this conversation, we're going to talk about what it actually takes to make heavy machinery driverless on an active and dangerous job site, his fascinating predictions for autonomous vehicles in our cities, why he's more skeptical about humanoids than almost anyone else in the field, and why physical AI may be the most defining technology story of the next decade. Let's dive right in. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. And with that, let's welcome Boris. Boris, first of all, I'm so excited for this conversation on many fronts. Both all of your experience on autonomous trucking and where that's heading, and then obviously on autonomous robotics. So just welcome. Thank you so much for coming here
Thank
today.
you, Alexa. It's a pleasure.
I want to start with the beginning. And before we dive in, I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of how you got here in life. You were born in the Soviet Union, later immigrated to the United States. I would love just to get a sense of like a formative moment in your childhood that you feel like launched you to where you are today.
So I was born in Moscow, like kind of right in the heart of the Soviet Union. My parents have been trying to leave for well over a decade, and you just couldn't. That feels like such a foreign concept today. They were finally able to leave in 1989. It was actually one of the earliest families that were allowed to leave, and my dad was actually pretty deeply involved in kind of helping coordinate kind of families of Russian scientists and mathematicians and engineers that, through kind of coordination with the U.S. government, were kind of negotiated to be able to leave Soviet Union. And I was 6 years old. And so we moved through a few countries in Europe and ended up in New York, lived in Brooklyn for a bit. And then through my dad's work, ended up in Texas, where he was in telecommunications doing large-scale optimization. And so I was in Dallas suburbs for most of my childhood. And so I was always excited about kind of mathematics and engineering, and video games was actually one of the things that got me interested in AI, where I still remember there's a famous video game series, computer game series called Civilization, where you're basically kind of simulating the history of the world and kind of playing a civilization, thinking about research and units and everything. And the complexity was so immense, which was part of the appeal of the game. The AI was okay, but not great at all. And I started to think about how, what are the kind of algorithms that drive the kind of coordination of all these systems. And that actually got me interested in engineering and computer science, which took me to Carnegie Mellon. And it's funny because today my 11-year-old son, I got him into Civilization, and normally parents would be like upset when their kids get into video games, and I'm kind of like strangely proud that my son's kind of following in my footsteps.
That's incredible. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about your time at Waymo, where again you really led their autonomous trucking initiative. I could geek out on this just because I'm so fascinated by how that could transform society. safer, all of the things. But can we just get a sense of like, first of all, tell us what you did there. Let's start there. And then I want to talk a little bit about kind of where it's headed. So let's start there.
It was such a wonderful time. So I was at Waymo for about 5 years. So I was an executive leading autonomous trucking, but then I was also leading various technology teams that supported kind of all platforms, cars and trucks. And so I was leading a perception team and then various other teams. And so we helped launch the Jaguars into San Francisco. Um, we unified the tech stack to where cars and trucks were as unified as possible in terms of the overall architecture, where you'd have differences in the platform, sensor layouts, you'd have an articulated trailer, but we were reusing almost every single part of the autonomy stack, which was very powerful. And so we ended up leading both freeway driverless for both cars and trucks. Waymo ended up focusing much more on the car side, where there was like really a pressure to commercialize and accelerate that. And so we actually launched driverless on freeways for the cars and at the end of 2023. But in a lot of ways, that was actually the trucking kind of program kind of unified into the car platform. And it was a fascinating problem because with trucking, you had this like 80,000-pound trucks with an articulated trailer. You had like crippled vehicle dynamics where there's like you had so little flexibility on acceleration and deceleration because of the mass of these vehicles. You had these interesting challenges that because of that, we had to push the perception range out from a few hundred meters, which is what the cars mostly utilize, to close to 1,000 meters. Using camera and radar to go far beyond lidar range. You started to think about these extremely rare long tail kind of challenges that appear so infrequently on a freeway and completely changes the way you do a safety framework. It was just amazing problems.
Can you give us an example of like one of those sort of real long tail challenges that you had to think through?
Let me share one that's like actually a big class of problems, like reliability. So, it's reliability is effectively how resilient are you to failures in pieces of your software and hardware. And so, uh, what's interesting about freeways is that the speed at which you drive means that you cannot stop in a lane. Like it's just like your budget for that is just like tiny, absolutely tiny. Because if you stop in a lane on a freeway, you actually have a meaningful risk of having a rear end collision with a really serious, kind of high severity of collision. And it's I think like something like 6 to 8% that integrates over time the longer you're sitting there. And so you have this situation where on a surface street, when you're driving in San Francisco, you're at 25, 30 miles an hour almost always. If you stop, it's a bad product experience or kind of operationally a headache, but it's not a safety risk in the like kind of traditional sense of safety. Here it is. And so not only do you have to reinvent the platform of redundancy for brake, steering, actuation, electrical, kind of anything that mechanically could fail, but by percentages, the largest frequency of what you have to deal with is everything else. So, a sensor failing, your computer crashing, a process hanging, your localization failing, your router, your perception, behavior, almost anything. And individually, these things might be rare, like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of miles in between. But when you compound all of them, you can't go driverless on a freeway without a solution. And so you end up having to have this incredible safety net of redundancy across everything, where you have like catch-alls with software that's constantly changing every single release and thrashing the reliability rates. And you have to have like a space shuttle level of reliability with a system that's evolving all the time. And so you have layers of primary and secondary systems and catch-alls and budgets that you have to manage to deal with things that you will never see in our lifetime. So, for example, computer will have a kernel panic that just crashes completely out of your control every 500,000 miles. But that'll eat up that's way more than your entire budget of these sort of failures. And so it becomes this interesting thing where when we went driverless on a freeway, the very first time, like the first 100 miles of driverless with the Jaguars, our reliability that we had to hit was 1,000 times higher than what was already a pretty sizable scale already driverless in San Francisco. And so 3 orders of magnitude. And so these are sort of challenges that are just like absolutely incredible. And for things that you would never see on a typical, 5-hour drive on a freeway.
Wow. Um, let's geek out for a second. Let's talk a little bit about the future of autonomous trucking. What's your expectation for the next 5 to 10 years? Kind of what's your mental model of what's probable?
Trucking is an incredible space. Like I was like, it was such a deep passion of not just mine, but actually a lot of the team at Bedrock is from the trucking program. We just kind of really loved working together on this. As an industry, it's astronomically large. So the entire ride-hailing industry in the U.S., I believe, is something like 50 billion in revenue. Trucking is a trillion, so it's like really, really significant. And it's the lifeblood of the entire economy. So you have everything grinds to a halt. You have if you burden the transport of goods, it's very dangerous. There's like when an accident happens, it's catastrophic. I think it's over 5,000 people a year die from trucking accidents in the United States. Very difficult kind of lifestyle for long haul truckers. And what you end up having is this like really deep inefficiency in the entire network where you have by design, like 11-hour driving limits, federally regulated to where you cannot exceed that because of fatigue. And so what you end up having is this fragmentation where you do a long haul route across the country. 55-60% of your time is spent on overnights, kind of like resting, or you have to do dual drivers, which is incredibly expensive. You end up having huge amounts of, I think it's something over over 25 to 30% of trucks are empty or close to empty because you have people having to they missed their pickup window and now they're not going to be able to meet their shift.
Yep.
Right, they have to go back home. You have people in Chicago when you actually need the trucks in LA during the holidays, and so you have all of this inefficiency. And there's studies that have been done where only about a third of that inefficiency is due to asymmetric demand. Like there's more trucks coming into the US from Mexico than going the other way. The rest of it is human factors. And so you have this like giant latent kind of capability to be able to optimize across the whole network and move trucks around anywhere where you need the demand, be able to drive 24/7. When you do that, the pricing will go down because the price of a load is amortizing all these empty loads and all this inefficiency.
Yep.
And the elasticity is actually quite interesting that if you fluctuate the pricing just a bit, you start competing with the price of rail. You start to be able to meet demand where, previously there isn't. You start to be able to be more efficient in retail, more efficient in, kind of goods. You start to reshape the entire logistic network. Right now, hubs are about 10 hours apart because of these driving limits oftentimes. So you start to go from splicing into today's economy of, routes and trucks into one where you can fundamentally re-optimize how you get much more productivity out of this network. And a lot of times when you do these sort of things, the elasticity is actually surprising where you unlock a huge amount of capability because the prices get a little bit cheaper and suddenly the demand grows and you start to be able to leverage these capabilities much more. It's actually quite exciting where you see this property in a lot of areas of autonomy and in what we're doing in construction and trucking and in cars and transportation and manufacturing. When you change the constraints, the physics of the whole industry completely re-optimizes around them.
I think that's part of what excites me so much, not just the improved safety, but just the incredible efficiencies that will be unlocked when our supply chain logistics get incredibly improved. Quickly, because I would be bummed not to ask you, give us your predictions 5 to 10 years out. What does autonomous trucking look like? What
Yeah.
percent of truck drivers are autonomous? What's your prediction of how quickly that will be adopted?
Yeah, it's a good question. So l- just like just like we saw with Waymo, where the scale can start to be exponential, but every 10x in volume takes time. Like it takes time to ramp up the manufacturing, to qualify the safety systems, to really methodically kind of scale these technologies. Because if you go too fast, you can kill people. Like it's just you have to be incredibly thoughtful. Today, it's an interesting ecosystem where uh, Waymo has paused this trucking program, but it completed the vehicle platform with Daimler, who's an incredible, like absolutely incredible, like technologically, I believe they're the strongest kind of kind of OEM on the technology front. Uh, I would expect Waymo to come back into trucking in the next handful of years, particularly now that the ride-hailing side is scaling. They're in the middle of a very, very aggressive ramp, but in the next handful of years, there's no future of Waymo that doesn't include trucking, just given how gigantic of an opportunity this is. And the thesis of Waymo has always been it's the driver, it's not the
Correct.
robotaxi or the autonomous car, right? So trucking would be back. And so I would imagine that as you get towards the end of the decade, Waymo's ramping up its trucking program again. I do believe that there's far more that's unique and challenging about just scaling autonomy and dealing with what does it take to ship hundreds of millions or billions of miles than there is that's unique about a car versus a truck. And so I do think that Waymo, I would still put them as a front runner, even if they're delayed by a few years. Aurora is also a really, really capable team that's now starting to like do the in their earliest ramp. And so I would look at them as one that would start to maybe retrace some of the early kind of ramp that Waymo was doing a few years back at like I think they're set to launch this year at some tens to hundred, to like 100 units. And so I would imagine that by the early 2030s, you start to get into uh, really meaningful miles. Now that could be hundreds of millions, like where Waymo is today, to billions, but that's still pretty early in the ramp. I would imagine that by 2035, you start to really see a sizable percentage of this become driverless because it's such a um, powerful enabler. And truck drivers, like the local routes are some of the most challenging, but also the more preferable ones where they don't have to be on the road all the time and away from the families. And so you'll start to see reoptimization of where the labor goes.
Okay, my last question is obviously I asked about trucking. How do you think about autonomous vehicles in cities? When do you expect when can I stop worrying that my kid needs to drive a car?
Oh, it's funny. I'm in the same same boat. I got three kids from between 5 and 11, so I'm anxiously waiting too. So okay, so
We're on the exact same page. I've got 7, 8, and 11, and my question
oh,
is like, can I make sure that they don't ever have to drive a car?
amazing. All right, yes, we got a lot in common here. Okay, so where's Waymo today? Over 200 million driverless miles, 10 times safer than a human. Like it's superhuman. It's absolutely incredible. It's in 11 cities at various degrees of maturity, driverless, fully driverless. San Francisco is the most mature, where over 40% of ride hailing in the city is Waymo's. It's
Wow.
by far preferred to Uber and Lyft, and it's constrained mainly by the availability of cars, where Waymo's like catching up on the like volume of cars. That's a really good signal of where things are going. There's 15 more cities announced, including London, New York, Tokyo. So really aggressive ramp. I think it's something like 15 cities that are on the like have been announced publicly for 2026. So you're going to see this go exponentially, where you're going to get into billions of miles. And so if you fast forward at that rate by 3-4 years, I believe that every single major metropolitan area in the U.S. will have very like deep penetration of robotaxis. And if you fast forward into the 2030s, it's very natural that this goes from robotaxi, where you can take advantage of being okay with higher price points because of utilization, some constraints on geography, into a world where you're fully unconstrained on geography, the price points are lower, and you start to infuse this into personal car ownership where you and I can buy a car that is level 4 capable. I would see that in the early part of the 2030s being a real thing. And so
I literally
by
cannot wait to own a Waymo. I just cannot stress
100%, right? Like, and that's like so worth it, right? It just changes completely your entire existence of
your entire existence.
5-6 years. I think that's like really, really doable. And so, yeah, right around the time when ours are about to enter the roads, I think it's actually depending on where you live, like it's a genuine decision on whether you need a car or not.
Last question on this before we shift over to everything you're building at Bedrock. Um, how does that change cities? How does that change things? Because I always say some of the most interesting stuff is the intersection of things. So it's not just that the autonomous vehicles are going to replace drivers, but what does that actually mean for delivery? Are stores now going to be on wheels? Like, does the Sephora need a store, or could it be an autonomous vehicle that moves? Like, how does that unlock the next layer of innovation in your mind once we believe that 85% of cars on the road are autonomous?
First of all, I think that it's not just cars and trucks; it's also local delivery and packages and everything else. So, first thing is, I think you start to see a shift in the layout of of urban environments. The amount of parking you need, the percentage of space that's taken up by parking in cities is astronomically like surprisingly large. That starts to disappear because, like, I think I read a stat now that like in cities like Manhattan, a shocking percentage of cars on the road are actually driving around waiting for somebody or looking for parking. So it's like you start to reduce the amount of parking required. The efficiency of the throughput of cities increases because it's just quicker and more efficient. I think the pain of driving reduces because now you can fully check out and have that be a time where you're relaxing, watching something, doing work. eventually the vehicles themselves start to shift to become more conducive to like an office style environment or sleeping or whatever the case might be. People become more comfortable with a commute that was 45 minutes used to be really painful, or an hour used to be painful. Now it becomes okay. And then obviously delivery and transportation becomes easier. And so you start to be able to probably rethink the entire layout um, of cities. And I would imagine that you would start to see different form factors where vehicles can be customized for local delivery. They can be customized for long driving. And that's where it gets like really, really interesting, where you start to rethink the form factors of today's cars and trucks into something of the future where you don't need a cabin on a truck in 10 years. You don't need you can optimize for the layouts of a car that optimize for comfort and work because of the expectations. So um, that's exciting, and I think it'll change, where people live and how they interact with their commutes and everything.
Okay, so Boris, given that you were doing something incredibly interesting, um, you obviously left with a number of other amazing Waymo leaders in 2024 to found Bedrock. Um, Tell us about Bedrock. Let's start there. First of all, like, what made you make this leap? What was the problem you saw? What was the aha moment that made you want to start this?
So the catalyst for us really getting excited about this was actually seeing the success of Waymo, of the shift that we had taken to really aggressively move from like a classic robotics stack where you're using kind of engineered solutions and heuristics and search and the kind of more rules into really embracing machine learning and data-driven approaches where you're using massive scale data to explain how does a human interact with the chaos of downtown San Francisco, or the like super crazy and diverse challenges that you would see in general in driving. And not only did that big bet play out where when we launched San Francisco, it was able to reasonably quickly go and solve the diverse challenges of San Francisco, but it generalized super well to Los Angeles, Phoenix, Austin, from car to truck, surface street to freeway. We started to see astronomical reduction in the amount of data that you needed and the work that it took to open up new cities and open up, kind of new platforms. And it went from giant engineering to basically qualification and operations to kind of go and stamp new cities over time. Um, and so for us, that became kind of a superpower where we started to think, where else can you apply this? Where you have diversities of use cases, environments, and conditions and platforms, and you have to have this sort of an approach to solve this problem. Otherwise, it's just way too much fragmentation for a kind of hyper-focused engineered solution. And that took us to exploring a lot of spaces, but we really landed on automating heavy machinery. And so we're starting with construction, but more broadly, this is about automating these large scale machines that are the workforce behind a lot of the work in construction, but also mining, agriculture, lumber, garbage movement, environmental cleanup. And so it's these large machines like from Caterpillar and Deere and others where they're the ones manipulating the earth, the aggregate material, farmland, like logs. And when you boil it down, they're they have a first of all, these industries account for over 20% of the world's GDP. So, and these are the workhorses, and this is like has astronomical labor shortages while demand is skyrocketing because of data center construction and onshoring and manufacturing. We looked at it and industries are massive. There's this spike in demand that's just unprecedented. Over $700 billion of data centers being built this year, and it's going to be over a trillion next year. It's just unbelievable. But when you look at the labor pool, there's a kind of this generational transition where people have not been going into construction, and so the retirement rate is accelerating. There was already a 500,000 worker shortage, just as a baseline. That's being exacerbated with the demand. And some of our partners are telling us they're expecting 50% retirement in the next 7 years. And so what we're doing is we're enabling fully autonomous heavy machines, starting with construction, to enable effectively turning these machines into operatorless machines where Bedrock becomes the digital operator and the software services around it, and enables um, the general contractors in construction or the miners and quarries and mines and farmers in agriculture to be able to operate these machines uh, and meet the demands that they have from a labor standpoint, compress schedules by working not just 8, 10, but 15, 20, 24 hours a day, optimize the safety where this is construction is the most dangerous job in the US. And again, really transform the physics of this industry. And so we're starting with construction and focusing on excavators as our first machine.
First of all, like, my young son would be so excited that you're focusing on
Oh,
excavators. Like, that's
I
what
got so many cool dad points. Well, I
I'm
found
like,
out my 5-year-old knows how to operate an excavator. It's
I'm
amazing.
like, "Boris, your dad points are legit on fire." Can we quickly rewind? Tell us in plain English, what is Bedrock Robotics doing
Yeah.
with,
So
uh, excavators?
exactly. So we are retrofitting existing heavy machinery like starting with excavators, and then turning them into uh, driverless machines. And so we have a retrofit that turns existing Caterpillar machines, for example, into ones that are capable of being fully operatorless for the scope that it's cleared for, and that increases with software updates. Our customers end up being the general contractors that own and operate these machines, and Bedrock becomes the digital operator of those machines. And so we enable these excavators to be completely operatorless and be able to do their work without any constraints and at a superhuman level of safety and precision, and enable these contractors to then leverage that to really rethink the way they operate their businesses.
Okay, so I have so many questions, Boris. You went from, obviously, and that's why I wanted to touch on the trucking, really thinking about fully building autonomous trucks. And then
Yep.
you shifted into another heavy machinery industry, so not that dissimilar to trucks, um, and made the decision to retrofit.
Yeah.
Let's double click on the decision not to go build autonomous excavators, but instead to retrofit. Why?
So if we could do that at Waymo, we would have done that as well. The thing is, in cars and trucks, you can't. You physically have to redesign these platforms to be drive-by-wire so you can control it digitally, and then have the redundancy we talked about in brake, steering, actuation because of safety reasons. And so these programs are really complicated. They took oftentimes kind of jointly with the partnerships like hundreds of millions of dollars, 4 to 5 years. And every single time we made a vehicle program, like this, the Chrysler Jaguars, Daimler Freightliners, Zeekr Hyundai, it would take this sort of an effort. Um, and so that's actually a huge barrier to get to market. Here, because of the way these machines are designed, we're able to retrofit them with a sensor and compute suite that turns them into autonomously capable, but we're able to ensure that they can still fail safely to a stop. And so we can safely deploy them fully driverlessly without having to fully reinvent an excavator or a wheel loader or a bulldozer. And that's actually incredibly enabling because we can get to market a lot faster. And then long term, we would partner with the OEMs to go and do this at manufacturing time because there's huge advantages there as well. But this is one of the reasons that we're able to uh, get later this year, we're going to release our first driverless systems, excavators doing mass earthwork as the first entry point. And we can do this a little bit over 2 years since the start of the company, where AV companies would take many, many more years and far more expense in order to do this. And so for us, this was an advantage. And as a customer, you now do not need to buy another. Like these machines cost $600,000. And so instead of having to buy a brand new machine that is custom and much more expensive and complex, you get to use your existing systems with a very inexpensive upfit and immediately start leveraging these capabilities with much less investment.
I'm going to get to what the technology is in 1 second, but I want to cover two topics. One is, what is the role of the human in these more autonomous excavators?
So when you look at the operations of a construction site, you have huge amounts like diversity of machines. You have lots of operators. You have supervisors. Um, uh, you even have like spotters for safety. You have all these things happening, and so we're starting with an excavator doing mass earthwork, and then the way these systems are designed, the technology very quickly snowballs the way we saw Waymo now stamping out lots of cities. We start with earthwork for an excavator, and then start adding new capabilities like demolition, material handling, trenching, fine grading, new machines like wheel loaders, bulldozers, motor graders, and then eventually you start being able to go up level and be an orchestration layer where you're able to uh, kind of coordinate a team of machines doing work. And as a GC, you can set a goal, and it's a digitized manufacturing process, and all sorts of things start to be appear when that's possible. Now, what's interesting is that on the construction side, there's such a gigantic span of expertise, and these machines have huge diversity of use cases of what they're used for, particularly an excavator, which is the most complicated of these machines, where it's a minimum 6 degree of freedom machine and sometimes as much as 9. And so it's effectively like an arm, and that's why it's so versatile. And so what we'll end up doing is starting to focus on these large scale use cases. But what that enables is in an industry that is so severely labor constrained, the workflow can actually move around, and just being able to meet the demands of some of this work that can make a project pencil out means that they can take on so many of the projects that currently are just being completely unfunded, like heavy civil work, schools, data centers, housing, and all of these places where we're feeling the pain. And it's actually quite expansionary where the jobs will shift around and you might have a person supervising 10 machines and doing the work on a side that like is not autonomous and is actually much more complex.
Course, it's actually a theme that we've heard on many past episodes where this isn't getting rid of that job. What it's simply doing is actually taking somebody from being a line worker and actually making them the factory manager
That's right.
of, to your point, of many machines. So, in fact, we're up leveling, upskilling these jobs. And you just said it's incredibly expansionary, which means now, rather than huge projects that we want done for society sitting, you know, unresourced, they actually now we can go do more with the supplies and infrastructure that we have. That's wonderful. What are the other advantages? You had said that there's a ton of other advantages of this. And by the way, I've obviously spent a lot of time on the Bedrock Robotics site where you can actually see the machines moving around and picking up the dirt. But talk through those other more subtle advantages.
Yeah, and this is where, like, as we started to spend more and more time with with our partners who eventually are our customers, uh, it's amazing to hear the sort of ways that they can, like, like, start to leverage this and rethink their business. So I'll go through a few. So labor, very obvious. Everybody's struggling with this, and every one of our partners, um, like, not a single person gets laid off. They take on more work, they meet the demand, like, they start allowing people not to get stressed into, like, overtime where you start to have fatigue and safety risks. So that's a given. What else can you do? Now, all of a sudden, you're able to compress schedules. A job that, because you can barely staff one shift, nobody's even thinking about nighttime in most cases. Now, instead of 8, 10-hour shifts, you can do 15 hours, 20 hours, 24 hours. And now you can take a project to compress it. The utilization of your machines increases. You can take on more work. The profit margins of the entire kind of business end up increasing. That's critical for, so imagine like you're a developer that's doing a commercial facility or investing in a factory. You're taking a loan at 9% interest. If you compress that by a month, it completely changes your IRR. Everything transforms. A data center gets millions of dollars revenue every day it's up and running. So that's massive. The predictability and the accuracy of these systems is going to be exceptional. And most importantly, it's very predictable. You don't, and so what happens now is because of both the variance of the work and the attrition risk on jobs and all the uncertainties that happen, GCs will put a 5% contingency on their bids oftentimes because of they're on the hook for liabilities if they're over. If that 5% becomes 2% because now you have complete control over surging labor and the
Yep.
predictability of your work, um, you tighten up your entire operations. A GC will win every single bid because a lot of these are won by like 0.5%. So that becomes a superpower. We see unprecedented levels of detail on the site. So now they can see the productivity mismatches in trucks to excavators. They see the progress. You can see real time estimates, and so that insights and analytics completely improves. And safety is a huge one where not just the people safety, which is again the most dangerous profession in the entire country, but the amount of secondary damage around hitting fire hydrants, damaging a truck, damaging the machine itself, preventable kind of wear on the machine, all of this improves. And now the every machine that has a spotter behind it, all this kind of disappears. So you start to have all of these like layers of benefit where, and then when you now put all these together as an operator, it sounds a lot like trucking where you can now move these machines anywhere you want, start a project 200 miles away the next day. You rethink the entire physics of the whole business.
Okay, so Boris, now I want to get your head up and think about the entire category, which is really the intersection of AI and robotics over the
Yep.
next decade. You have spent, and by the way, you have such dad points. I just like sitting here reflecting. Your kids think you're so cool. If we look out the next decade, what are some of the big predictions you have? Give us, give us just some of your like kind of very clear predictions that you have for the whole category.
Yeah. So I think physical AI is going to be, in my opinion, the biggest theme of the next 10, 15 years. We've seen the transformation on a digital side, astronomical. Everything that Anthropic, OpenAI, everybody's doing. At the end of the day, 80% of the world's economy is still physical industries. It's industrial, it's construction, agriculture, mining, manufacturing, logistics. So I think we're just scratching the surface in this. We've seen the beginnings of it in transportation with Waymo, and it's literally just the beginnings. It's trivial percentage of there's 3 trillion miles of driving per year in the US. Waymo has done cumulatively 200 million in the entire history of the company. So it's clearly in the beginning of this astronomical ramp. Um, we're pushing in as significant of an industry in these kind of the heavy machinery and construction and related industries. I think manufacturing is another astronomical one where like these are like 10% plus of GDP industries that all have like such a transformative ability to kind of reshape the way they work. And so I generally do think that the theme of the next 10 years will be bringing AI into physical form. The way that happens, though, is not going to look like OpenAI and Claude. You're not going to have this like single model that solves everything because that was able to bootstrap off of this infinite amount of data that was publicly available on the internet. Here you have way more differentiation in the platforms and the sensors, and you have very complicated safety risks. And so you're going to see more vertical integration, like what we're doing in construction, what Waymo's doing in transportation. But the businesses can be trillion-dollar businesses because of how big these sectors are.
Not only do I agree with you, we backed two companies, one called Bright AI, which is physical sensors for very specific categories, and Tree Swift, which is physical robotics for trees and for overseeing forests. And so I deeply agree with you, which is it's not a one size cuts all LLM that can solve millions of use cases. You actually need the data sets and to go and you're really building a very, very unique data set that will be powerful here. Um, Talk a little bit about like a contrarian view that you have. Like, what's an opinion that you have that maybe um, others don't have, given your perch?
Yeah, I'm pessimistic about this wave of humanoids. I think that this is technology that could be much further away than people think because there's still pretty massive advances that need to happen in tactile sensing and simulation, um, and particularly when you look at sectors like the consumer market where you have very high quality bars that people expect, price point pressures that are like extreme. You have so much combinations of technology risk and then product and market risk that uh, I'm personally so I can understand the excitement about it, but the idea that there'll be this like universal kind of platform that kind of solves everything, in my mind, I think this could be almost like a dot-com style situation where uh, it's not wrong, it's just off by a big period of time, and there's, like, big advances that need to happen, and it comes back, and these things start to happen much later than people think, but the solutions that are actually much more practical are more surgically focused solutions that can provide really deep value focused on a particular application and industry, and so, I am, much less optimistic about that as a category of robotics immediately today as a practical kind of like, near-term business case.
Do you mean humanoids in warehouses or humanoids in homes or all humanoids?
I'd say particularly in like homes and the idea of 100% generalized solutions, I'm more optimistic of the idea of manipulation in fulfillment in a warehouse, in assembly, in manufacturing, where you customize it for the particular application you have. And you don't necessarily need to mimic the form factor of a human. You solve the problem with these technologies and eventually grow into something more generalizable.
We share that opinion. Um, Boris, last question before we move to the quick fire round where I just get some of your hot takes. Um, what are you most excited about? One question. What are you most excited about?
I think the pace of technology progress is the fastest I've ever experienced in my lifetime. I can't wait for it to start to have an impact on some of these spaces where it takes a little longer to break through, but can completely transform our lives, particularly in medicine, genetics, personalized
Same.
treatment, where so much of it has been this painful progression of almost like iterative testing that can the way we've seen this transform a lot of these like digital and kind of structured physical AI problems, I think that's going to become much more prevalent in the next 10 years. I can't wait for that to happen. And that may be the most transformative impact of AI, which I think that's actually kind of almost necessary, but because there's this unfortunate negative opinion that's forming on AI because it feels like society isn't universally being able to benefit from it. I hope that in places like education and healthcare, that's the most transformative and universal applications of these technologies that become possible.
I agree with you on that. Okay, quick fire round before we let you go. What's a book that you recommend everybody read? What's a book that's had an outsized impact on your life? It can be any book. It does not have to be a business book.
Uh, I loved Creativity Inc. This was actually Ed Catmull's biography in the history of Pixar, and it was just a fascinating story. But it was almost like this memoir on how do you create reproducible creativity that doesn't stifle the ability for individuals to like push their visions, but maintains the level of quality bar that you need as you scale a company. It was actually quite amazing, and I think applies to a lot of industries far beyond entertainment.
That's awesome. Um, what's a mantra that you have that kind of helps fuel your work? And it can be anything, a belief, but like sort of something that runs in the back of your head.
I think the most incredible applications and solutions are at the overlap of industries that don't typically have commonality. Uh, and we've seen this over and over again in like these types of companies where you bring backgrounds from completely different places, and the sum is far bigger than the parts.
I totally agree with you. I think it is the Venn diagram between truly divergent categories where you find wild unlocked for society. So I deeply agree with that. Um, if you had to talk about another category that you're just fascinated to learn about right now that is not construction, what is it? What's just another place where the world is catching your attention?
Oh my gosh. Well, I got 2 answers for this, like, practically the other area I was really excited about and was started to really explore was manufacturing, where I do think that there's going to be a world not too far in the future where you start to create an increasing library of types of tasks that can be automated. They're increasingly sophisticated, and the combination of those can transform the way we think about manufacturing and assembly. Uh, Maybe less practically for me personally, but one that if I were to, like, transform and shift decades of experience into another area, it's genetics. I'm so fascinated by how something that was it's effectively the software of the human body, and with that lens you can take all of the same types of approaches and mindsets that we have in AI today to a space that is, as we talked about, the most transformative of our generation.
I'm only smiling because that is precisely what I would have said too, and I deeply
I
agree.
love it.
Boris, last question. To date, what's been the biggest pinch me moment of your career? What's like the moment that when you tell your kids you're proud of? What is it? We'll end there.
uh, you know what, I think I hope to have, like, many of these at Bedrock. At Waymo, it was, being able to really see the first driverless car milestones, like the very first time in San Francisco, commercial rides, and then the very, very first freeway driverless that we, like, very, very directly kind of pushed and worked on. The reason being is that, autonomous driving was the thing that got me into robotics. It was like this holy grail that was so exciting, and it was like this catalyst for so many people in the industry that pulled us into this like physical autonomy space. And it was this search of R&D for decades, and then finally hit this inflection point where it started to become real. And it was an incredible feeling for the first time.
That's amazing. Boris, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody out there, if you want to check out Bedrock Robotics, please do. The website is incredible. Boris, we are rooting for you. Thank you for unlocking the future of everything, construction, humanity, saving lives, and for all your work at Waymo. I'm deeply personally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's
We wish
just a
you the best.
pleasure.
You're the best. We
Yeah.
wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Love the conversation, and excited to talk again soon.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate, review, subscribe. We'll be back again with another episode of Inspired with Alexa Montobo. Thank you.